Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our final panel for the entire weekend. Very excited for this panel. Two of my colleagues are here, so that's quite fun. This is the Future of Work panel, and we're looking at this from a lot of different ways with regards to data, from hiring to when you're actually working in a workplace, to actually using data in a workplace, all kinds of different ways in which data is being used to make hiring and the job search and everything else just a little bit easier. And also a very viable role to be in when you're working in data, as you will hear from one of our speakers as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Tanika Askew, Kirsty Jones, Monika, Hewavitarne, and Erica Bone. Please, guys, welcome to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for the intro.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Erica Bone. I'm the VP of People at Warner Music, which is overseeing all things HR at Warner Music. And I'm going to be the moderator today for the panel discussion. So as Christine was saying, today's panel is all about the future of work and thinking about how we can use data in different ways for hiring, but also about how companies can use data to manage, develop, retain, and inspire the employees. So I'm looking forward to hearing from the speakers today and also taking away some learnings from my role into Warner Music. But before we get started, I'm going to hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a bit more about their role. So over to Kirsty first.
Hi, great to meet you. I hope you've all had a brilliant weekend. We're super inspired by everything that you've been doing. So I'm Kirsty. I actually have the pleasure of working alongside Erica at Warner Music. So I am almost 11 years to the day in HR, which just makes me feel super, super old. But I've been in sort of people, HR functions in the creative industries throughout my career and occupying a few different roles. But right now, my role is fundamentally around our employee experience. So how can we really understand what it's like and what your sort of day-to-day lived experience is at Warner Music, but how can we also amplify that and really elevate it? It makes for a pretty broad role, but it means that over the last few years, I've done a whole range of things from generational research. We commissioned a piece of research around Gen Z's expectations from the workplace and how we could really evolve our employee experience to better support their sort of needs and aspirations. It involves things like employee engagement and employee listening experiences, diversity programs, and right through to more recently digitizing our learning proposition.
Great, welcome Kirsty. And over to Tanika to tell us a bit about herself and her role.
Yeah, so I am currently an analytics leader, and I work with different organizations. I was previously in consulting for 6 years. So taking that experience where I work with clients to uncover hidden insights from their data to help them improve their business processes. And then now I'm leveraging the same methodologies to make sure that organizations understand how to drive insight and tell stories with their data. So from figuring out how to optimize the acceptance process for a offer and how to leverage that to then improve quality of hire. So understanding how when we hire someone, how is their performance in the first 2 years? In previous roles, we looked at that data and I help make strategic decisions around what programs did we need to launch? Did we need to launch any DEI efforts for specific groups to help them just make sure that their performance is high and they have the resources that they need to be successful? And then we also want to make sure that people are being promoted and paid equitably. So making sure that we understand what that looks like and providing a lens and view to that as well.
Great, thank you for joining us today. And then handing over to Monika to explain a bit about her role.
Hi, so I'm Monika. I'm a lead community analyst at Harmonic. So we're essentially like a boutique recruitment agency that are the experts in supplying like operations and finance talent to the creative space. So I've actually been here for 2 years now and basically a specialist headhunter for the UK and European music market. So just from like a personal perspective, I've been like really passionate about working for the music industry, just, you know, being surrounded by listening to music and going to events and festivals. So I guess like the most fun part about my job is just knowing that maybe to help people sort of get into the music industry. So my network is growing like on a daily basis. I get to work with music publishers, record labels, venues, artist management companies, and some of the companies that I've worked with quite recently are like Hypnosis Songs Fund, PPL, Broadwick Live, like Audio Network. And in the morning I could literally be speaking to an A&R coordinator. In the afternoon it could very much be like a copyright manager or CEO in the afternoon. But also part of my role, I also help release content to the industry. So I've got a couple of articles on my LinkedIn which sort of give a bit more insight into the industry. So some articles that I wrote were how much value operations managers add to the music industry, or how the music industry has been surviving COVID. So yeah, we can check out that as well if you guys are interested.
That's great. In fact, hearing a bit more about your role just then and hearing you talk specifically about A&R, I'm going to kick off with the first question to you, Monika. And I think when people are often talking about the different roles in the music industry, A&R is such a popular role that comes up immediately at the forefront. But I wonder if you could talk a bit more about other roles that exist in the music industry.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree. Most people assume going to the music industry is, taking A&R role, but that's great for creators, but there's so many other roles that I think are quite important that help contribute to the success of the music industry. So I've picked like 3 main areas which I think are quite important. So the first is like music publishing. That's things like copyright managers or assistants, neighbouring rights assistants, royalties. And I'd say those are probably the most data heavy positions with elements of like legal and finance. The second would be more on the sort of management side of things. So these are essentially your label managers, operations managers, venue managers. And I'd say these people kind of focus a bit more on ensuring processes within an organization are running smoothly and efficiently, and just managing like different types of stakeholders and overseeing multiple departments, from anything like customer service, product, marketing, events, or sales. And then the last one I would say would be kind of like marketing and product roles. I mean, it is pretty standard across other industries, but I think the main difference within music is instead of your product being like Capri Sun, it would be, the artists and creating marketing plans around their releases or music events and streaming platforms.
Thank you for that. Really helpful to get just so many roles and jobs and trying to understand what they all consist of. And I'd really like to ask Kirsty Jones that same question, actually, a bit more about the roles that you're mindful of in the music industry.
Yeah, of course. So I was sort of laughing at the question about sort of A&R, because you can often meet people out in the world and they find out you work in music. They're like, oh, I'd love to pick your brains. I really want to be in A&R. And it's just like such a like face palm moment of just like the industry is so much broader. So my role at Warner spans all of our divisions. So we operate a recorded music business, which is where our artists are signed, a music publishing business, which Monika touched on, which is where our songwriters are signed. And then we also have a kind of corporate infrastructure that you would expect to see in any organization. But recorded music is sort of where I've grown up in a sort of label culture, and that's where our A&R functions do sit. So they're the people that go and find and nurture and sign our artists, but not without the support of like wild amounts of infrastructure around them. So within the labels themselves, there's like marketing functions, digital, social, audience, press, promo, TV, but there's a whole wealth of people who help kind of inform that artist development narrative, and they're supported by these kind of centralized functions around things like business affairs. So the people who go and help support the actual signing of the deal, so they're typically from a legal background, the finance population who do a huge amount of work around our royalties or monetizing our artists or looking at how revenue streams operate. Our commercial teams who look at what the commercial strategy looks like, so they work with our retailers and our platforms, and obviously the shift from a kind of physical oriented market to a much more streaming led business proposition means that they are constantly consuming streaming data and so on and so forth. So those are huge parts of kind of our business, and then all of that's underpinned by kind of core functions around things like supply chain, technology, a global data office which looks at things like predictive marketing market data and how that varies in different markets, to make sure that our strategies are truly global and we're not being really Anglo-oriented, pushing kind of US and UK strategies and repertoire into different markets, but we're recognizing the value of kind of what local territories can bring. And then things like those kind of corporate functions, like ourselves in the HR people team, we're supported by our friends in corporate comms, broader legal, finance, and so on and so forth. So there really is such a huge breadth, and it is a very small proportion of people who come from those like very typically A&R backgrounds.
So many roles. If I was starting my career journey, I think I would have just written 1,000 notes about all those different jobs, and it's a lot. And I think that's the most important thing about some of this discussion, is getting people to understand the extent of how many different roles and different careers there are in the music industry. And with that, I think I'm going to hand over to Monika this question to go a bit deeper and ask you, what types of skills, in your opinion, when companies are coming to you for your expertise in headhunting or finding talent, what would you say are some of the types of skills that music companies are looking for when hiring? And do you think the expectation to understand data has moved beyond data-specific roles?
Yeah, definitely. I think what people fail to realise is, although it's a very creative space, there is a real mix of skills that companies do look for, and it is very dependent on the role itself. And I think as things are becoming more data-driven, the ability to, for example, organise data sets and input data into Excel, bespoke software like Music Maestro, requires actually very analytical and technical skills, and that's where your music publishing roles sort of come in. And, to some degree, you need to also take into account there are things like behaviours that play an important part as well to the person's personality. And, the important thing is just having the passion for the music industry, and, displaying just general level of good communication skills, resilience and creativity. But really, each skill will be quite unique to each role and individual, and everyone to some degree has a type of skill that would be like very relevant. Like, for example, in management roles, like the key here is just good organizations, so ability to show strong leadership skills and people management. And then communication again is quite key, as you're liaising with different stakeholders and different teams and departments within a business. But then with like marketing and product, as like data is becoming more important over time, like companies are looking for individuals who can display some analytical skills, especially within more digital focused roles. So for example, you'd think from a very junior level, there's a lot of creativity that goes into marketing, but now with the use of digital and sort of streaming data, you need people to look at this type of data and create campaigns, especially at a senior level, based around the performance and the data you get from a report, to be able to foresee and also create that future strategy, and base the goals around that and like objectives. So yeah, I think it's lots of different elements, but as long as people have the passion and are a type of person that wants to go into either data or management, then there's different roles that will be needed in each of those areas.
Great, thank you for that. I think when looking at the future of work, we have to look at, first of all, the people that are currently working for us and think about the future of what those people can be. What are those future roles? Some of the roles that don't even exist at the moment will be here in such a short time span, kind of 2 or 3 years. So I'm going to hand over to Tanika for this question. I'm just really keen to know a bit more about what is people analytics and how do you use it to improve an organization?
Yeah, people analytics is taking a look at your entire organization end to end. So from when a person is recruited from the organization, what is their experience like? How are we improving the recruitment process? And then once they get in, are they onboarded efficiently and effectively? Do they have the resources that they need? Are they successful with having those manager conversations? Are your managers making sure that they have the right conversations so that that person can feel that they are adequately prepared to be successful in that role? And once they're in the role, we take a listening perspective and say, how are you feeling about the organization, your role? Is there anything we need to improve? Do you feel like, we also add a D&I lens on that and we start to evaluate like what each individual cohort is feeling. So we look at it from an organization as a whole. We may look at it by cohort, gender, race, ethnicity, age, anyone with disabilities as well, and make sure that the entire organization there's a consistent experience. And if there are any inconsistencies, we evaluate that as well. And then you take that data as well to look at attrition. What can we do to make sure that people are staying with the organization or have the resources that they need? Are they being promoted adequately and equitably? We continue to evaluate pay and promotion on an ongoing basis so that if there's questions around it, we're making sure that there's a fair process. And when we look at attrition, where are people leaving at the point in their career? Do they hit the 3-year mark? Do they hit the 2-year mark? And if you have some advanced analytics going on, you can start to provide like little nudges to make sure that the managers are aware that, hey, this person is coming up on 2 years at the organization. Typically, we see at the 2-year mark, people tend to leave or exit the organization, or at this 2-year mark in this role and level, this is where promotions typically happen. So making sure we send nudges to the managers and leaders to say, check in on your employees and make sure they're fine. But the best way to go about doing something like that is to be consistent all year round for every year that employee is at the company. And then you won't have to worry about high attrition rate or retention programs as much.
Right.
Not gonna say not worry about them, but just as much. And then if you really look at it, you can create an end-to-end very good people analytics models from how I work with an organization and in consulting, getting people onboarded to a project and within a company it can be very complex and difficult. So working in consulting, I was like the unofficial recruiter. I was actually a consultant working on different projects, but I always took the time to find some different niche area to work in that I was passionate about. And I found out about talent and what I could do with talent analytics because the recruiters I was working with to help, refer people into the company, they didn't have that data expertise. So I always offer like, do you need help? Do you need an Excel, like quick analysis? Do you need a dashboard? Are you doing this on a continuing basis? So providing that helped me understand a little bit more about recruiting analytics. And I started to provide just different strategy from my experience and talking to the experiences of others. I was referring so many people, I would just always follow up and see what their experience was. So bringing your offer acceptance rate to be higher by increasing the time frame of an interview. So instead of it being a 2-3 week or 2 to 3 month interview process, doing interview days where everyone can come together, interview 6 or 7 candidates in a day, and they block off their calendar and all they're doing is interviews, and that candidate gets an offer within 48 hours. That definitely increases the offer acceptance rate, and it helps expedite the timeline we're doing with negotiations as well. So just taking analytics, it can be very end to end, and an organization that's doing it right has really benefited from making sure that the individual that comes into the organization is feeling like they're coming into an organization because of that process. Their business processes are very well defined. They understand what they're supposed to be doing in their role. They're transparent about how you get promoted or get into a leadership level role. That level of transparency also has to be there, and analytics has helped the organization do that too.
Love that. I love how there's just so many different lenses and angles that can be looked at around people analytics within an organization. Fascinating, and something I'm super passionate about as well. And I'm really keen to hear from Kirsty as well, because just hearing from Tanika that broad range of areas that people analytics covers. What does kind of people analytics mean to you, and how do you think organizations are using it?
I mean, like Tanika just gave the most comprehensive gold standard response ever. So I feel like I can't better it in any way. But I guess just to add, like for me, it's to Tanika's point, it's that ability to predict, that ability to sort of track and evaluate at every single level. If it's embedded really thoughtfully, it can make a real difference of understanding and really listening to what works. But also we can start understanding like what makes our people tick, and how do we convert that sort of level of engagement into longer term commitment and above and beyond motivation. And fundamentally that's good for business and it's good for people. And so it's also really about pivoting from us being very kind of gut-led and sort of intuition oriented in how we go, this is the right thing to do from a people perspective for our business, to really equipping us with like proper analytics and insights that we can go into the business and influence them about where the right place to invest is and prioritize their spend, their resource, and so on and so forth.
That's helpful. And I was wondering if you go a little bit step further by talking specifically about how you use data in your role, maybe as a project or something you've been working on to kind of bring to life what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we I think to start, I would say like music has a lot to learn from, from Teneika specifically, but from tech industries of like, this isn't intuitive to us or hasn't been historically. So we are much more embryonic in our journey around analytics and how it informs the employee experience. But I would say there's some like a few kind of key touch points that I think we have embedded and we're starting to do really well. And then there's some things that we're starting to make shapes in, which I think are really interesting and could give us kind of broader insight. So Tanika was talking about listening surveys and kind of getting under the skin of people's experience at different touch points in the employee experience. So what does it feel like to be hired? What's your first week like? What's your first 60 days like? And how does that inform how you think about the business and what your experience has been? How can we amplify that, elevate that? How can we enhance it? Or how can we retain that engagement and make sure you still feel like that in a year's time, 2 years time, 3 years time? And how can we look at you and how you're progressing through the business? So if you've just had a promotion, do you feel like you've been equipped with everything you needed to make that step? Is that helping support you directionally? Have you got all the infrastructure you need around you and so on? So analytics can help inform those touch points that might result in a sort of manager education. It might be a training proposition, or it could be something about kind of an awareness, driving people to communications and so on. So there can be loads of different outcomes for it. I think a big focus for us, so we have been doing engagement work for a good few years, which is great. We're definitely sort of more recently, there's a big emphasis on how we use analytics from a diversity, equity and inclusion stance. So Tanika was talking to that. We also have internal commitments that we hold ourselves accountable to. Our analytics helps us understand how we're achieving against those and make sure that we're on track where we need to be making progress. And particularly things like how we support our underrepresented communities within the business, that becomes a really important focus. And there's this sort of age-old, what gets measured gets changed, and it's really true. If we understand the data, we can make sure that we are investing in the right places and we are sort of driving, whether it's re-education or different processes and so on, and making sure that they are really intentional about their sort of how they will solution. So that's a big thing for us at the moment. But also we're looking at things like how to understand our people's usage of things like systems. So we're starting to deploy things like overlay technologies that help people navigate systems, particularly where they aren't sort of data-centric personalities or preferences. So it helps them to use the systems, makes the user experience much easier, but also helps us drive things like efficiency. So if we're seeing that a recurrent number of people are stumbling over a particular process step or leaving it incomplete, then we can use the analytics from that moment to say, this requires a training intervention, or we need to come up with a simpler process, or something like that helps us kind of ultimately drive business efficiencies as well.
Okay, that's really helpful. I'm going to change the direction slightly of this discussion. I've got a few more questions to ask, but mindful I've only got 5 minutes left. And I would really like to throw a question to Tanika. You mentioned before about using some of the work streams you're focusing at the moment to specifically look at the DE&I agenda. I'd really like to go into that in a bit more detail. And you mentioned before about a pay equity, but it doesn't need to be that. It could be something a bit broader, but just something you're working on, maybe a specific project where you feel the work you're doing is really helping drive and transform the agenda around DE&I using analytics.
Yeah, I've worked on several DEI efforts, especially in consulting, because the workforce is so large. When you're working with my first company was 25,000, second company was 250,000. Working with these large organizations, you want to make sure that, as Kirsty said, what is getting measured, because that is how things will start to change. So when you launch a program centered around DE&I, you're essentially using data to help drive what that program is going to do, how it's going to benefit the employees that you're targeting. So I've worked on several different DEI programs in previous roles. And what they've done is help to understand what was the baseline. You use your data to help set a baseline of what is going on at the time that we need this effort and initiative started. So whether it is individuals feel like they are not receiving the right mentorship or guidance, if they feel like they don't understand the performance and assessment process, if they're not getting projects that are aligned to their skill set, so they're not able to showcase what they can do, or they don't have stretch projects. So we look at the data to evaluate what are the gaps and what can we do to resolve those gaps, and start to set OKRs and goals around, okay, these are the type of programs that we need, and this is what we need to improve on. So we look at these programs and say, we're looking to decrease the attrition rate over a 2-year time span, making sure that you also measure within a time frame that can be achieved. So sometimes I see these large companies making commitments, and I wonder, how can you achieve this in a year or two when you've never measured this or done this before? It's really difficult to actually commit to something and achieve that goal if you're not giving yourself the runtime to effectively evaluate. But if you are really measuring, you can start to look at some of the programs. For example, we launched a program that was a 2-year cohort to help individuals, one, receive the mentorship from leaders that they felt like they did not have access to. So we had leaders coming in consistently every 6 to 8 weeks, talking to individuals, giving their perspective, asking them questions in a fireside chat or town hall format, where they felt like it was a safe space. And we started to learn a lot more about, we do these listening surveys, but people aren't really giving us the nitty gritty that we need. And so having that opportunity there, we started to hear more about the experience of the employees. Then we started to take this program and say there's also a skills gap. Individuals who are staffing these employees and staffing our consultants think that they don't have the skills to get these roles. So how can we upskill individuals and train them so that they're adequately prepped to start on a new project or interview for this project? And so we end up we go through an iteration of things around what we're seeing in the data and what strategies we can implement to improve that. So whether it's providing access to leaders, giving leaders insight into what the cohort is saying, whether it's gender, age, disability, or race and ethnicity, providing the leaders that insight on a continuing basis and making sure that they also have metrics and targets that they have to meet. So that has been the epitome of making sure that people are meeting the goals. You're definitely going to always have individuals who are more passionate about it. But if you're consistently measuring it, you'll start to see trends. You'll start to see where the gap areas are, and roll out programs to help facilitate that. Roll out new strategy. If it needs to be a policy, roll that out as well. As Kirsty said, there is also a lot of things going on in the learning and training space, because as we get to a more inclusive state, we have to make trainings and learning more inclusive, not just from a race and ethnicity or a gender standpoint, but from a disability standpoint as well. So how do we make sure that trainings are accessible to everyone, and that everyone is getting what they need out of that training?
Great. so great to hear all that from yourself. I could literally just continue firing questions at you all evening, but I'm going to be selfless and open the floor up for the Q&A, which I believe Christine is going to be leading. I can see lots of great questions coming through.
Yes, I am. All right, so we have a few in here. Let's see. First of all, one from Brendan. Does the US have the same hiring requirements as the UK for a similar role? So let's say I'm assuming probably with Warner, for example, if you were looking for a role in the US versus the UK, do you see very different requirements for roles?
I'm just, I have not actually.
Kirsty, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll happily take that. It's an excellent question. And you know what? I don't have a strong view on it. I think it could vary in the functions. I think on the whole, we're operating similarly as businesses. Like at Warner, the US is our biggest market, the UK is our next, and about 65% of our people across the two. So I would say there is definitely consistency, but depending on the sort of function you work on, there might be specific local requirements, different platforms. If you think about something like Pandora is massive in the US, it's not particularly significant over in the UK. So there may be sort of nuances or specific kind of regional kind of cultural requirements, I would say. But on the whole, I would say core skills generally transferable across different regions.
Yeah, I just checked out a few roles. I just went to the workday of Warner Music, and these look very similar, very similar to roles posted in the US.
Thank you for that. That makes total sense. Obviously, with different platforms and things like that, the subject matter expertise there is definitely useful sometimes. But sometimes things are pretty similar, like Spotify is the same in the US and the UK, for example. Another question coming in from Shannon, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room has the same question. What's the best way to get into the industry and get noticed if you haven't worked within music before? Monika, why don't you take this one, since you're seeing a lot of different roles in various parts of the music industry?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing is it's a very creative place, and it's somewhere that a lot of people in the industry are obviously working in there because they're passionate about that. For example, when I look at certain roles and I know a client is asking for either music industry experience, I think biggest thing I look for is like evidence that they do have that passion outside of work. So there is a lot of transferable skills from a job role. Like marketing in most companies require the exact same skills, management. But I think when you look at a CV, you can tell to some degree if someone is invested in it based on maybe involvement that they've done, maybe things like they've done when they're younger, or even just, following certain things. It's their knowledge around the music industry, I think, is probably key. And you can pretty much tell that either from the way CV is created, in terms of what they put on there, but also from interview. Like you can tell if someone is just saying, I just want to get into the industry because I like music, or whether actually someone is interested in it and has the knowledge and understanding a bit more about the industry itself.
Yes, that makes total sense, and hopefully that everyone here that's been working on their music projects over the last 3 days hopefully have something to put into their portfolio to show that deep interest you have outside of just, hey, I listen to music. Great, no more questions, you guys? I feel like I thought we'd get so many more. Again, I told like the last panel, everyone is frantically working to finish their project.
They're working on their project.
So I'm sure they're loving this.
I just finished a data science program. I went through the same thing. I'm like, everyone's trying to get everything done and touched up at the last minute. It's always really interesting. So I'm excited to see them.
I am also excited to see the presentations, and this is being recorded and it's going to be played back for our group when they're a little bit less stressed out as well. So I imagine there will be a good amount of follow-ups after that also. So I think with that, I think we will go ahead and let you wonderful women go. Thank you very, very much, Tanika, Monika, Erica, and Kirsty. Thank you for the time. I'm sure everyone really appreciated it, even though they're not being very vocal right now. I'm sure they did appreciate it. And we'll see you guys. Hopefully you guys stick around and watch the presentations. But yeah, I'll see you guys very soon.